Hi everyone, my name is Alexis and I'm a New York-based developer. In this video, we'll be learning how to share a website on the internet. We will learn what deploying is and how to use GitHub Pages hosting service to host a personal static website. Knowing how to deploy a website on GitHub Pages will allow you to share the projects you've done here in Codecademy as part of a portfolio. The purpose of this video is to introduce you to the process of deploying a website through the use of Git commands in the terminal and the GitHub Pages hosting service. By the end of this video, you should be able to use GitHub Pages to host a personal static website and add projects to this website as subpages. And when I say static website, I mean that there is no web application that is going to build the pages of my website. Whatever is in the files that make up my website, that is exactly what the user is going to see, and in our case, typically that's HTML files. And I'm not talking about adding scripts that might change the appearance of a website or display different information or data when different visitors visit it. I'm specifically talking only about the way that our website is built. Key concepts that you'll need to know in order to deploy a website with GitHub Pages are basic bash commands like print working directory, make directory, and change directory, knowledge of a basic Git workflow that enables you to stage, commit, and push changes using Git in the terminal, understanding how the file system on your computer works, and URLs or Uniform Resource Locators. So before we begin, let's talk about what deploying actually is. And deploying is a term that originally meant moving troops into a position where they could be put to some specific action or use. Similarly, when we use the term in reference to some kind of software or a website, we mean we are readying a project to be put to a specific use or action. In this case, we have a website that we want to deploy with GitHub Pages so that anyone on the internet can visit and use it. The process of deploying won't always be like that of deploying a static website with GitHub Pages, although it will be similar. The exact process will vary from hosting service to hosting service and the needs of your project. We may also have to deploy and redeploy a website many times whenever we make changes to a website, including changing the content, appearance, or the software and programs that run our website or application. So why are we suggesting that you use GitHub Pages? Well, mostly because it's easy to use, it uses tools you already have, and it's very reliable. More specifically, it's easy to set up, it allows for seamless collaboration using Git and GitHub, it's free to use and has over 95% uptime, so it's very reliable, and it allows live updating with normal GitHub workflow. Now that we know what deploying is and why we're using GitHub Pages, let's go to the GitHub Pages website and take a look at the documentation about it there. So it's important to note that this free GitHub Pages service only allows you to create one website for your GitHub username or account. So you can't set up several different websites under different domain names. Most likely you'll use this website as your personal website for an online portfolio or blog. To deploy with GitHub Pages, you'll need Git, the terminal, the bash shell or a comparable shell that allows you to run basic bash commands, and to be signed in as a GitHub user. If you have all those things, then you're ready to start. So let's scroll down the page here and see what steps we need to take to set up our site. The first thing that we see is we have a choice here in terms of instruction between setting up a project site or user or organization site, and we want user or organization site. Now we can move on to step 1 and create a repository. So step 1 says to create a repository. It tells us to head over to the GitHub website and create a new repository named username.github.io, where username here is just a placeholder for your username on GitHub. And it says if the first part of the repository doesn't exactly match your username, it won't work, so make sure to get it right. Now this last part of the instruction isn't particularly notable, there's no warning, it's not bolded very much, but it is very, very important. You need to use your username as part of your repository name. It can't have spaces, extra punctuation, and it can't be your own name, it has to be your username. If you don't follow this instruction, then your website won't work. You'll try and visit it and you'll get a 404 error. As for the domain name, that github.io that you saw in the instruction, if you don't want that and you change the name of the repository to something else, your website won't work. That domain of github.io, that is the domain that they use for all the GitHub Pages users, and you can't really change that. However, what you can do is purchase a custom domain name from a domain name registrar, and a lot of web hosting services will do this for you. I'm not going to go over how to do that in this video, but if you search for adding a custom domain name, GitHub Pages site, you should be able to find GitHub's instructions on how to do this. Let's move to the github.com website and make a new repository. There's a couple ways to do that. There is a new repository button that appears right after you log into the site, and you can click on that. Or you can click on your avatar, your profile image there, and you'll get a drop-down menu, and you want to choose your repositories. And that'll bring you to a new page. And on that new page, you'll see a green button there, and that button will allow you to create a new repository. And this brings us to a new page where we can enter a repository name, and we need to do username.github.io. There's also another field here that's called description, and that's optional, and you can put whatever you want in there to describe what this repository is or does. Lastly, you have a few options here, including having a public or a private repo, and you should just choose public. You can have a private repo for your GitHub Pages website, but because your website is on the internet and the internet is public, by nature your private repo has now become public. So don't put any sensitive or private information on your GitHub Pages website you wouldn't want anyone to know or see. We'll skip adding a README. We're going to add a file later through the command line. We'll skip the git ignore for now, and you can add a license if you want for your website if you feel your content needs it. Otherwise, you can just leave it alone and have none. When you're finished, press the Create Repository button, and that'll create a new repository on the GitHub website. When you create a new repository, you then get redirected to this page, and it contains information on setting up a new repository, including adding a README and importing code from another repository. The most important thing here for us is the URL at the top of the page, because that's going to be the URL that we use to set our remote. And that'll allow us to push code and changes from our computer to this specific repository on the GitHub website. So before I move on, there's a question in the instructions here that says, what Git client are you using? And when they say Git client, they just mean what interface or means of running Git commands are you going to use. You have three options here: a terminal, GitHub desktop, and I don't know, but we do know we should be using a terminal. I wouldn't suggest using a GUI or graphical user interface like GitHub desktop right now. It's better if you put effort into learning how to use the command line and using Git through the command line, because it'll benefit you in the long run. There's a variety of reasons why I suggest this, or we suggest this, and it's because it'll make you more efficient, and also you'll be able to run more sophisticated commands and combinations of commands in the command line. So for the remaining steps here, you'll need to have your terminal open because we'll be running both Git and bash commands in the command line. So before we start running Git commands, we should check that it's actually installed. The way to do that is to open the terminal and to run this command, git -- version. And what that option or flag of -- version does is it tells us what the version number of Git is that we have installed. So I'll run that here and I get back a version number, so I know it's installed. If you get back something like unknown command, that's how you're going to know that you don't have Git installed, and you need to stop here and install Git on your computer for the command line. Otherwise, we won't be able to finish our website. So we have Git installed. Now we need to go to step 2 where it says clone the repository. And it says go to the folder where you want to store your project and clone the new repository. And it also gives us the Git command that we need to run in order to actually clone the repository and get a copy of that on our computer. You'll notice here that we have some placeholders, the word username. It should be replaced with your actual GitHub username. Don't use the word username here. It won't matter too much because we won't be typing this in. We're going to copy this from the GitHub repo on the GitHub website. So now we can go back to the repository that we just created. Like I said earlier, we need to grab this URL because this URL is a specific URL for this repo on GitHub's website. And we'll use this to set it as the remote for our repo on our computer because we need to know where and to which repo on github.com we should be sending changes to our website. Now you have two options here. You have HTTPS and SSH, and these are just two different protocols. When I say protocols, they're just different ways or means of transferring data from our local repository to our remote repository at that URL. The local repository being the repository we have on our computer, and the remote being the one on GitHub's website. So note here that there are actually buttons, HTTPS and SSH, so when you click on them, it'll generate different URLs. They're not the same, so just be aware of that difference. GitHub suggests that we use HTTPS. It potentially makes it easier to access the repo. So now we'll click on that HTTPS button, so it'll generate a URL that begins with HTTPS, and then click on the copy icon, or that clipboard icon, so it will copy that URL to our clipboard so you can paste it in the terminal later. Now we can clone into our repository on our computer. So we'll need to have the terminal open now. For the rest of the video, we'll be running commands in the command line, git commands and bash commands, so if you're not comfortable or familiar with those things, I would really suggest watching the other videos that we have on the command line. The first thing that we need to do is figure out where we are in the file system of our computer and where we want to put our repo in that file system. So I'd recommend creating a projects folder somewhere on your computer that you know where it is and you know you'll be able to access it easily. If you don't know where you are in your file system, use the print working directory command to get the path to where you currently are. Generally, when you open up your terminal and you start a new session, it'll place you in the home folder of your user account, but that might be different depending on how you have things set up or your specific operating system. However, it's kind of like a general rule, that's where you're going to be. Next, I'm going to assume that you don't have a projects folder, so I'm going to create one here. I'll use the make directory command, and that will make a folder with whatever name I give it as an argument. Here it's going to be called projects. I should also note here that it's not specifically taking a directory name. I'm giving it a name here because I want to create a folder in the folder I'm currently in. You could also give it a path to a different folder, another destination folder where you want to create it, and it would create a folder somewhere else on your file system and not in the current folder you're in. So we can make files and folders on different parts of our file system or different parts of our computer. We just need to describe how to get there from where we currently are. And I just want to draw attention to a common error that I often see, which is that people tend to type in a misspelled command and they get command not found, and they're typing it again and again and they think that something's wrong with their terminal or their computer, when it's just a really easy to fix spelling mistake. So just be aware that if you get command not found, take a look at what you're actually typing or copy pasting in. It might just be a misspelled command. If you're not sure that you made the projects folder or if it's in this current directory that you're in, use the list command of ls, and that'll list all the files and folders in the current directory that you're in, and you should see a projects folder there. The next step is to actually go into that projects folder using the cd command for change directory. And the way that command works is you're going to type cd and either the name of the folder you want to change into, if that folder is in the current directory you're in, or the path to that folder if it's somewhere else. Okay, I've typed it in, and I can tell that I'm currently in the projects folder because my command line prompt changed. It now says projects, and that's the text that's to the left of that greater than symbol. Now, it might look different for you on your computer because I customized my terminal, but generally when you move in and out of folders, your command line prompt will display the path or the current folder that you're in. Now, the next command that we're going to run is not going to be a bash command, it's going to be a git command. And that command is git clone. So we're going to run git clone, and we're going to paste the URL that we copied from the GitHub website. Let's read the output of running this command. First, it says cloning into and the name of the repository. Then it gives us a warning that our repo is empty. That just means we don't have any files or folders in the repo that we cloned. And that's fine because we'll add those later. We'll use the list command of ls, and we'll see our cloned repo here in our current directory. Now that we have a copy of the repository on our computer or locally, we can move on to step 3. In step 3, we'll create a file, and specifically an HTML file, to add to our repo, and it even gives us the commands so that we can do that. Going back to the terminal here, we're going to change into the repo using the cd command. So we'll use the cd command and the name of the repository, and then we see that we actually are in the repo because the command line prompt has changed the name of the repo, and we see the empty brackets indicating an empty repository. Next, we'll create an HTML file that contains the text "Hello World." To do that, we'll use the echo command and the output redirection operator, which is that greater than symbol that you'll see me type and also in the instructions. You could also open the text editor and create a new HTML file with the text "Hello World" in it and save it, and it would do the same exact thing as what this step is asking us to do. However, we're here to learn, so if you haven't seen echo before or used the redirection operator, now's a good time to play with both of these things, understand what they do, and how to use them. So we're going to follow the instructions exactly as they're written today. So in human speak, we can read this command as saying output the text "Hello World." Normally that would mean print it in the terminal so I can see the text. And instead of printing it, redirect that text to a new file in this folder called index.html. So the expected result of running this command should be that we have a new file called index.html, and inside of that file it should have the text "Hello World." Now there's two ways to check that this actually occurred. One is to type ls, which is the command to list all files and folders, and we should see an index.html file in this folder, or we can open up the file manager and check the repository folder and it should have index.html. But that's just half of what that command was doing. We now have the index.html file. We have to check if the text is actually in that file. And one way to do that is to use the command cat. And the cat command reads and outputs the contents of a file. Okay, we can see that "Hello World" is indeed inside of that HTML file, so everything's looking good and we can move on to the next step. Okay, so step 4 says push it. Add, commit, and push your changes. And it even gives us the git commands to run here. And what we're really looking at is just a very basic Git workflow where we modify the files of a repo, stage those changes, commit those changes, and then finally we push the changes to a remote repository. So let's head back to the terminal and run these commands. Okay, so the first command that I'm going to run here is git status, and git status will give me the status of the files in my repo. And here it has a message for me. It says I have an untracked file called index.html, which makes sense because we created a brand new file and we didn't commit it or save it to our version history. So the way that I'm going to track this is that I'm going to add it to the staging area and prepare it to be committed to our version history by running git add -- all. Let's talk about what this git add command is actually doing. Here, this git add command with that all option, it's saying I want you to prepare to save to the official version history of this repo any files that I've changed, any files I've created, and any files I've deleted. So the other git add commands that you've seen, like git add dot and git add -u, those commands will only save specific or certain changes that you've made to your repo. Git add all, that'll save any change that you've made, so that's the one that we want here. So now I'll run git status and I should get a different message here, and it says I don't have commits yet, but I do have one modification. I have a new file that I will commit eventually. So I'm going to do that now by running either git commit or git commit -m with a message in quotes. So the first option of git commit, what that does is that it will open a text editor either in your terminal or your default text editor. So it's a good option if you want to write a longer commit message. If you have a short commit message, then you can just run git commit -m, and that -m option allows you to write a commit message on the same line as the command in between quote marks. So we have a short commit message. The instructions said to just write initial commit, so I'll go with git commit -m and I'll change the message. And when I do that, it gives me a message that I have a commit here and a file changed. When I run git status, I don't have anything else to stage. And when I run the command git log with the option of one line, that's just a way to shorten the git log. It's not as verbose, there's not as much information. I see that I now have a commit. Okay, so we have committed all of our changes. Let's push those changes to the repo that's hosted on GitHub. And the way we're going to do that is use the command git push -u origin master. So if we take a look at this command, what it is saying is we're going to take all of our changes that we made, that we saved as commits, and we're going to push those changes to the repository that's hosted on GitHub, which is the repo that we see when we go to the GitHub website. And I do have a note here and a call out in the video that I added that -u is only necessary for the first push. And the reason behind that is that -u is an option or flag that sets up tracking between a branch on your local repository and a branch on your remote repository. What that means practically for you is that it links the two branches together, so you can run commands like git push and git pull, and you can omit the -u origin master part of this command, because Git automatically knows that when you run commands like git push and git pull, that you are referencing the master branch on the remote repository and not some other branch that you have. Doing this also will allow you to see how far behind the remote branch your local branch is in terms of commits. And then we run that command and we'll see a prompt for the username, we'll type that in, and another prompt for the password, and this time you won't see what you're typing in. And that is considered a security feature, so don't be alarmed, there's nothing wrong with Git. It just doesn't show you what you type for the password. If you get it wrong, it'll just prompt you to enter it again. And once we type this in, it should just automatically push our changes, and we can see it starting to do that. It hung for about like a second. That's pretty normal for GitHub, especially if you have a lot of commits. You might be waiting for a while. But what I'm looking at here now is that we were successful, and this text here is just some output that gets generated when you push your commits. And so most of it is about data transfer from your local repo to your remote repo, but at the bottom you can see branch master is set up to track the remote branch master from origin, and that again was the work of that -u option. Let's go back to the repo on github.com and see what changed. And now if we actually go to the repos page on the GitHub website and I refresh that page, I see I have some changes here. It doesn't look the same anymore. It's showing an initial commit with a message and a new file that was added. If I click on the link here, I'll see who committed it, how long ago, the message, and if I click on the hash here, I can actually see what changed. And it says that I've added a line here that says hello world. All right, we finished our website, so it's very simple, but it should be functional, and we should go test it out now. We can test it out just like you would any other website by visiting it, using the search bar in your browser, and just putting in the URL. One thing to note about GitHub Pages is that GitHub Pages uses HTTPS, which is a specific protocol or means of transferring data back and forth between your browser and a website, and it's more secure than other protocols like HTTP. So your full URL of your website should be https://username.github.io. Okay, so our website works. I can see hello world. And that's it for making a GitHub Pages website. One thing to note here is that if you don't see any text or you're getting a 404 error message, just give it maybe like half an hour and see if there's any change and it works after that. Otherwise, I would go over each of the steps and check that I did them correctly, especially the naming part of the repository. And it's also not unusual for GitHub occasionally to go down or for it to have other issues. So also check GitHub status, and you can do that. They have a Twitter account. Just look up GitHub status and you can see if their services are up and running. The last thing I want to speak about in this video are project sites, and project sites allow us to take other repos and link them to our website repo so they show up as additional pages of our website. Okay, just for an example, I have this other repo here called Wine Festival, and I think it's a pretty good project, and I want to add it to my website as another page on the website. So the first thing that I'll do is go to the repo that I want to add as a subpage to my website and click on the settings at the top of the repo, and you'll see the gear symbol next to it. That'll redirect us to this page where we're going to scroll down to GitHub Pages. And we'll see here that it says GitHub Pages is currently disabled. We want to enable it. And it says select a source below to enable GitHub Pages for this repository. So we click on the drop-down button here, or the drop-down menu where it says none, and we want to set it to master branch. And it says use the master branch for GitHub Pages. We'll then hit the save button to enable our changes. Once we do that, we get a success message at the top of the page, as well as in the GitHub Pages section, and a message that says your site is ready to be published at and a URL. That URL is the URL for our live project site. And if you look closely at this URL, you can sort of understand the relationship that GitHub Pages is creating between your project site repos and your personal website repo. It looks like a file system path here where your personal website repo is the root, and inside of that is another subdirectory or subfolder, and in this case that would be Wine Festival or project repo. So let's check that our project here was added as a subpage to our website by clicking on the link. So when we visit the link, we can see our project is now a subpage of our website and everything is working. Just a few things to note here. If your project isn't showing up as a page on your website, give it about half an hour. Otherwise, check GitHub status and check that you followed the steps correctly. The other thing to note is if you toggle that GitHub Pages button in the setting of the project repo, like if you turn it on and then turn it off and then turn it back on again, that will delay the process of it actually deploying and showing up as part of a page of your website. So if that is the case and you toggle it on and off, give it about half an hour and then it should show up. Lastly, I just have a few tips here if you're having trouble with your project site. The first is that you should use relative and not absolute paths, and a lot of times people will have broken images and broken videos because they used an absolute path. That is, they hard-coded in, say, the name of their computer, a drive on their computer, and then the file name. And that's just not going to work on GitHub Pages because GitHub doesn't have any access to your computer. So don't use an absolute path, use a relative path. Secondly, double check that you've turned on GitHub Pages and set the source as master if your project site isn't showing up. It's really easy to forget to turn on GitHub Pages in the setting of the project site and not just the main personal website. And lastly, remember that GitHub Pages is case sensitive. So a lot of times people will say, you know, my assets aren't working, the images are broken, the video is missing, and it's because they didn't keep using the same case when referencing a certain folder or file. And on your computer is pretty forgiving. If you know your folder is images with a capital I, but you reference it with a lowercase I, it might still link it and everything looks like it works. But when you push your changes to GitHub and have it host on GitHub Pages isn't that forgiving. If it's not the same case, then it will just come up as missing or a broken image. So if you're having issues with casing here, then I would say just keep everything lowercase. There's no real reason for you to upcase some folder and file names and downcase others. If you just keep it all the same case and preferably lowercase, we don't want to capitalize everything and have all of our code shouting at us, then you're just eliminating the source of a lot of problems. So just keep everything lowercase. So I created this diagram to help you all better visualize what we did today in this video. Basically, we took a bunch of repos that we had and we turned them into pages of a website. And if you look to the right of the diagram, you can see how repository names are translated into URLs. And those URLs also indicate the relationship between project repositories and the main website repository. It's almost like a file system path here where the project repositories are treated as a subfolder of our website repository. Okay, so that's it for this video. We learned how to take repositories that we had and turn them into our own website with the very easy to use GitHub Pages service. If you found this video useful, don't forget to like it. Otherwise, great work and happy coding!